my name's Lee Shorten. I'm currently an actor based in Los Angeles, but I actually grew up in Australia and I was adopted, so raised by a white family. And then I was a lawyer for a while, and yeah, now I'm here. So I grew up in a small rural town, a place called Tamworth, which no one has ever heard of. But it is the country music capital of Australia, if that gives you kind of a picture of what that place is like. And uh, it's a very white, kind of conservative town, and I was one of the only Asian people there. Like, so you would never really see any Asian people. So that's kind of what that was like. And I mean, when I grew up, I mean, like, obviously media is still very white now, but I think media was even more white when I grew up. So um, it was kind of a weird, isolating experience for for sure. And I think, being adopted added a kind of an interesting extra challenge because there was definitely kind of a disconnect between the way you're being raised and the way you sort of perceive yourself versus the way the community perceives you. And you experience racism, but you don't really have anyone who can explain what that is to you because your white family and friends don't really, they can't, you don't really have a system like you would if you grew up with someone else in the diaspora. So yeah, it was like, I'm not complaining. I had a lot of good memories too, obviously, but yeah, that's kind of a snapshot. They didn't really, and I mean, I don't even know that they could. Like, even if they wanted to, it would still be through such a, like, white lens of like what they thought it would be. But like, I think they didn't really have an interest in that. Um, and it's funny because as you grow up, you learn a lot more too about like the nuances of the difference between various East and Southeast Asian cultures. Whereas again, that's something they wouldn't probably have been able to appreciate. Like, the only Asian food we had in town was like the Chinese takeaway restaurant that did, like, honey chicken and sweet and sour pork and whatever. And like that was my exposure to Asian culture until probably my teens. Because there just wasn't anything around. I think even if they wanted to, they wouldn't have had the tools or resources to do that. Yeah, it's kind of hard to compare because my time in North America, like I was in Vancouver, in Canada for a number of years, and now I'm in LA, both of which have like sizable Asian populations and a lot of Asian foods and all that kind of thing. And just by the nature of my work, a lot of my friends now are Asian, so it's been totally different. But I know, if I had have grown up in Melbourne or Sydney in Australia, it would probably be comparable because both those cities have large Asian populations and, access to Asian culture. So yeah, it's kind of apples to oranges, I think. Yeah, so it's kind of been interesting because I was adopted from Korea, and for many years I thought I was just Korean. And then I traveled to Japan, which is actually the only East Asian country I've been to, like maybe a decade ago, and everyone kind of thought I was Japanese, which was interesting. And then, especially because the two countries have such a interesting history, to put it diplomatically. And then, when I got into acting, now there's kind of this push towards this ultra specific authentic casting, which is a whole other thing. So then I ended up taking a DNA test out of curiosity, and it actually turns out I'm quite a blend of Chinese, Korean, and Japanese. Uh, so in terms of like reconnecting with the homeland or whatever, that's kind of an interesting question too, because even though, say, I was born in Korea, I never really had like this visceral connection to that because I didn't grow up experiencing that culture. And then my as a teenager, my access to Asian culture was mainly through like Japanese anime, and like Chinese films. So I kind of always felt more connected to those cultures more than Korean. That's why I went to Japan first, and I have to go to Korea at some point. I think to see it. but yeah, like I haven't managed to get back there, and again, I think just because a lot of the roles I've played have been Japanese, and have been, have necessitated a lot of like historical research of Japan. So like I I weirdly feel probably the most connected to my Japanese side. So. There's always like language requests, and I don't really speak any other languages, not like fluently or anything. And I mean, I wish I did. I wish I did speak another language. I'm like jealous of you guys. It's amazing because I'm not even just you guys. Like anyone who is bi or trilingual or multilingual, it's like such a wonderful thing. And yeah, it's beautiful. And I think interestingly, Canada have their kind of like officially a bilingual country is like a fascinating thing. And then when you look at now apparently what's going on in China with the Mandarin versus Cantonese, it's like language is such a powerful thing. I have a definitely like a love-hate relationship in terms of it with the business, because again I think we're at such we're at such an interesting point with Asian representation. Oh, sorry, that's my cat. Hello. Because on one hand, there's more Asian representation, and I think that's a very positive thing. On the flip side is I think it's like overwhelmingly, it's not say like Asian American or Western Asian representation. It still tends to be like very East Asian focused. Like a lot of our stories are like do have these language requirements, or they're about like first gen immigrant families, or these things, and it's such a very specific thing, or they're period pieces, and I think it's tough in that I think there's a double standard placed on Asian actors because like prime example, like two prime examples. HBO's Chernobyl was like a hugely successful show. Everyone loved it. Yet everyone on that show was like British actors doing their own British accents. Um, Matt Damon and Ben Affleck's upcoming movie, The Last Duel, is based on French history. They're all American actors, and then they're doing British accents, and none of these things are questioned. And no one's like, why aren't they speaking ancient Greek or ancient Latin in sword and sandal pics? But then when we tell an Asian story, suddenly you can only be cast if you're actually Japanese or actually Chinese, and you have to be able to speak Japanese and you have to be able to speak Chinese, and it's like I see the argument for the authenticity, but then it's also very alienating to a lot of Western Asian actors in diaspora who don't necessarily have any of those things. And it's a double standard that's placed on us that would never be placed on white actors who can do whatever they want. And it just seems kind of odd. And then you have the other disconnects of things where I don't know if you see this in Britain, but so many times, if it's a Chinese project or a Japanese project, they'll demand that only Japanese or Chinese actors read for it. Then yet when you step behind the camera, you'll have white creatives, or you'll have like Chinese creatives doing a Japanese story. And it's so fascinating that the ultra specific authentic requirements only seem to exist for in front of the camera personnel. Well, I mean, I would say my cynical, cheap, quick answer is that like actors tend to be the face of the project, and they're the ones who do the most press. So it's like if they're authentic, no one will look any further because they'll kind of absorb all the positive and negative flack, and they'll be able to deflect any other questions. Would be my kind of quick answer. Generationally, I think things improve, and as a general point of view, and like this is more specific to whiteness, but it's like when you look at the history of whiteness is ever expanding. Traditionally Irish immigrants were outside of whiteness, then Italian immigrants were outside of whiteness, Greek immigrants are outside of whiteness, and whiteness tends to expand to allow them in. So maybe there's hope for all of us, as when we talk about the lunchbox moment. Sushi is so much more accepted now. Ramen is so much more in the cultural zeitgeist. So like I think food wise, again, we're getting there. The I think I used to be a big believer in education too. When you pointed out, we live in a world now with the internet where you have unlimited information, and I used to think that would make us better. But then, when you look at the state of the world, I'm not convinced that's true anymore. And I think part of the problem is let's say it used to be, let's say there's 10 of us at a table, someone says something racist, and the nine of us are like, that's really fucking uncool. Then we're like, shit, all my friends think that's uncool. I might adjust my behavior. Now you can be at a table, your nine friends be like, that's racist. And then you just go to a forum on the internet where a million people will tell you your friends are wrong, right? So if anything, I actually think the internet and the access to information has maybe made us more isolated, and it's easier to find the confirmation bias, and it's easier to continue to be racist and entrenched in your views. And I think the answer isn't necessarily exposure to other cultures, because that's so specific, and the way that people work. It's like, oh, now I've met an Asian person, maybe Asians are okay, but now I'm still racist against Latinos or the Middle East. I just think fundamentally we need to start somehow teaching empathy as a general tool, because then that's like a skill that's applied everywhere. Because then the moment you meet someone, you, as I think it's Ted Lasso would say, you're like curious before judgmental. And that's not specific to like, oh, I understand this Asian food, or I understand this, Latino language, or I understand this cultural or religious moment. That's just generally my approach to life is, this is new, but that's not bad. But I don't really know how you teach that, especially when we live in a world of, people taking ivermectin and believing that, the coronavirus is some worldwide conspiracy or whatever. So sadly, I don't have the answer. Yeah, I guess it's like, yeah, not just unique to the diaspora, but just life in general. It's, I think fundamentally, most of us all face the same kind of struggles. And then it's as you move up, or as you drill down to specificity, it's where that's where we tend to splinter, right? I mean, like, as you say, it's like if you meet another person in the diaspora, you immediately have something in common. And then it's when you start to drill down that suddenly it's like, well, I'm a second gen Chinese immigrant, you're a fifth gen Japanese immigrant, and like you're bilingual, I'm not, and then it all becomes like so splintered. And I guess it is about, I guess it's like moving forward, I suppose it's about, you find the commonalities, then you find where the first breaking point is, and then it's like, how do you reconcile that breaking point, or how do you leverage that breaking point so that you both grow, and as opposed to growth apart. But I don't know. It's such a concerted effort to do anything really. And as Asian Americans, I think too, it's like it's taken me a while to realize, and I think it was, I can't remember who told me this, but it was like Asian American is a political identity, not a cultural identity. And that was like kind of like, right, right. So you can't, and not to say that, say, like the African American community is like homogenous, but I think they're a little bit more culturally common ground, because they share the experience of all being uprooted from their own home against their will. Whereas like we dribbled in over centuries from all different parts of the world that have their own beefs and issues. So I don't know, how do we, and should we be coming together more? I don't know.